Husband secretly invited his sister on our honeymoon behind my back even when I refused. So I ditched him at the airport and went on a solo trip instead. Hi. So my husband Jacob, 30M, and I, 27F, got married about a week ago and yesterday, we were supposed to leave for our honeymoon. But I ended up taking a flight to someplace else altogether because his younger sister showed up at the airport and apparently, Jacob was in on this the whole time and had actually invited her to come along with us. For context, his sister Angie, 26F, recently went through a terrible divorce with her ex-husband and has been very torn up about it for the past couple of months. Angie and her ex had been high school sweethearts and got married as soon as they could. They spent several beautiful years together until about a year ago when Angie found out that he had been having an affair for months with one of his coworkers. She tried to make it work with him even after that, but after several sessions of marriage counseling, her ex was the one who filed for divorce because he claimed that he just couldn't do this anymore. She begged him to stay, but in spite of that, he left and they got divorced. She received everything in the divorce, the house and the cars, and a hefty settlement, but even that wasn't enough for her because she wanted her marriage to stay intact and didn't care about anything else. I thought it was really sad and I honestly felt bad for her because she was a sweet person and she didn't deserve it. To be honest, nobody deserves to live like that, and I had witnessed firsthand how depressed she was in the months following the divorce. I wanted to help her out, but all I could offer her were words of consolation. I wanted to involve her in the wedding so that she would stay busy and distracted, but Jacob told me that he didn't think it was such a good idea because being part of a wedding like ours would just remind her that her own marriage had fallen apart. And he made a good point, so I decided to only stick to checking up on her once in a while. Angie and I were never close friends, but we got along well. In fact, I think I could say that about most of Jacob's family. I wouldn't say that I was close to any of them, but we got along well, and I never had a problem with any of them so far. But then, a day after my wedding, my mother-in-law Nora, 55F, called me up and said that she wanted me to invite Angie to accompany us on our honeymoon. Jacob and I had been planning for this for a really long time and I think I had been more excited about the honeymoon than the wedding, if I'm being really honest. I love traveling and so does Jacob and we love mountain ranges in particular, so we had a whole tour of the Alps planned. We had taken about 3 weeks off from work and we've been really looking forward to this ever since we planned it. Now I did feel bad for Angie, and I would have been willing to do whatever it took to cheer her up, except for this. Nora told me that even Angie loved to travel, and she believed that going on a trip with us would help her with the pain. But Angie wouldn't be willing to come along unless I invited her personally, so she wanted me to ask her and make it seem like I wanted her to come along. But truth be told, I didn't want her to come with us. For starters, this was supposed to be our honeymoon and I don't think it's appropriate for family to accompany the newlyweds on their honeymoon. And secondly, I was really looking forward to this since the weeks leading up to the wedding had been really busy and hectic for both of us. Jacob and I had specifically taken time off so we could travel and have some quality time with just each other. It didn't seem fair for Nora to ask me to give all that up for the sake of Angie's happiness. So, with a heavy heart, I had to tell Nora that I couldn't do so because it wouldn't be fair to either of us. I expected her to understand that this was supposed to be our honeymoon and I didn't want Angie tagging along. She didn't fight with me at the time but tried to convince me that this could do her world of good and I would be doing them all a huge favor by inviting her to come with us. She told me that she was going to cover the cost of Angie traveling with us and I didn't even have to worry about the money. All that I had to do was invite her and be there for her. She was pushing it really hard, but even then, I stood my ground and I firmly declined it because it was not fair to either of us. I could understand that it was difficult for her to deal with a divorce, but she couldn't just tag along with us and expect us to give up our honeymoon just so we could cheer her up. Besides, it wasn't even Angie trying to convince me to let her come along. Nora believed that it would be good for her to travel with us. Had Angie approached me, I might have even considered saying yes. But I didn't think that she wanted to come along with us either because she hadn't said anything of the sort and even when I had mentioned the honeymoon to her, she hadn't shown any interest in wanting to come with us, and I just told me to have fun. That was it. So after a few minutes of conversation and arguing, Nora decided to drop it and it didn't come up after that. After that conversation, I spoke to Jacob about what his mother had said, but strangely enough, he didn't have any reaction to it. He just asked me what I had told her, and I told him that I had said no. When I said that, he just grunted and that was it, no further discussion about it. In hindsight, I probably should have read more into it, but at the time, I was just too excited to start packing for our honeymoon, so I didn't pay much mind to his reaction. In the week between the wedding and the honeymoon, we were busy at work because we were trying to wrap everything up before we left. So we didn't have a chance to meet anybody from his family. And nobody tried to get in touch with us either. Jacob and I would talk about the honeymoon and our trip occasionally whenever we were at home this last week, but he didn't say a single word about what he had been planning. Until the very last minute, I had no idea that he had invited Angie to come with us and I only found out when we were at the airport and Angie and Nora showed up. Yesterday, Jacob and I left about 3 hours before our flight was scheduled at the airport. While we were waiting outside and taking our bags out of the cabs, I suddenly noticed Angie and Nora approaching us. I tried to give everybody involved the benefit of the doubt until I noticed that Angie had her bags with her. I knew then that she was definitely not here to just say goodbye to us or drop us off. She yelled surprise really loudly and then hugged me when she was close enough, but I was still trying to process what was going on. Because I think I had been very clear about my feelings on this with both Jacob and his mother. However, despite what I had said, here, she was, seemingly ready to accompany us on our honeymoon. When Angie realized that I looked confused and not happy when I saw her, her smile faded, and she asked me if I was not happy to see her. I didn't even know what to say, so I just turned to Jacob for an explanation. I wanted him to tell me that he had no idea about any of this and that Nora was the one who was responsible for this. But instead, he told me that after I had informed him about the phone call and the conversation that I had with Nora the other day, he couldn't help but think about how nice it would be for Angie to come with us on the trip and have a good time to distract her. The reason he had not reacted that day was that he had gone behind my back a couple of hours later and told Angie that apparently I was the one who had suggested this idea and invited her to come with us on the trip to surprise me. And he was right about one thing, I was definitely surprised, but not in a good way. I thought it was sneaky and selfish of him to go behind my back to the one thing that I had told him that I didn't want. I like Angie, like I said, she's a really nice person and I like her. But I like a lot of people. I'm not going to take all of them with me on my honeymoon just because it would be a nice thing to do. I don't have to do things just because it's a sweet thing to do, especially when it comes to something as intimate and special as a honeymoon. After Jacob told me that this was his idea, and he was the one who had invited her to come along with us, I sort of snapped at him right in front of Angie and his mother and told him that this was simply unacceptable. I knew that Angie would feel bad about it, but that was the thing on my mind at that moment. I told him that he had gone behind my back, and I couldn't forgive him for that, because it had barely even been a week into our marriage, and he was already being sneaky and lying to me. He tried to pass this off as something really small and insignificant, but he thought, I had been planning for this honeymoon for ages and I had made it very clear to him that I was really looking forward to this. Even on the day that I had told him about the suggestion that Nora had made and that I didn't like the idea of asking Angie to come along, just because she was depressed, I think I had been very clear about my feelings on this. So this was not petty or insignificant in the slightest to me. I felt like he had betrayed me and I was extremely upset. But he simply refused to look at it like that, and he said that I was making a bigger deal out of it than was necessary and completely blowing this out of proportion. He told me that Angie would be paying for herself. She would stay in a separate room and she would only join us for certain activities, but we wouldn't be together all the time. However, that was not enough for me, because at the end of the day, she was still going to be accompanying us on our honeymoon. And I don't know about everybody else, but I really think that's weird. Had this been any other trip, like a normal weekend trip, I don't think I would have had a problem, but asking my sister-in-law to come with me on my honeymoon was where I drew the line. After a bit of fighting and arguing, I decided that I had had enough, and since Jacob refused to take accountability and accept that he had done something messed up, I thought that I was better off going away on my own. I had already taken 3 weeks off from work, and I wasn't going to let that go to waste. So I dropped the argument and went inside the airport, after telling him not to follow me. But of course, he did follow me. However, I didn't want him around me at that particular point in time, so I actually had to yell at him to stop following me around and said that I didn't want him anywhere near me or I really would report him for harassment. That stopped him from coming after me, but I could tell from his face that he was really upset and hurt by what I said. I didn't care because I was pissed off and I just wanted to be away from him. So once I had yelled at him, and he had stopped following me, I decided to get myself a ticket and hopped onto the next flight to Miami. I was really lucky because it didn't require me to wait for long and I was on the flight before Jacob even had a chance to change his mind about following me. Once I landed in Miami, I decided to turn on my phone and check for texts and I realized that my inbox was full of messages from Jacob, Angie, and Nora. All of them seemed to be really apologetic for whatever had happened, but the only apology that really stood out was the one that I received from Angie. She told me that when, a few days ago, Jacob had visited her, and told her that I had been suggesting that she accompany us on our honeymoon, she could barely even believe it. Apparently, she was even about to ask me if I was actually okay with it because she didn't want to be intruding, but Jacob was the one who told her not to ask me because he wanted it to be a surprise for me. He had laid it on thick and made her believe that this was my idea. But after our fight at the airport, it had become clear to her that this was all planned by her mother and her brother, and she said that she was sorry on their behalf because what they had done was really stupid and she didn't blame me for reacting the way that I did because she was in my